The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of State University's research cafeteria, casting long shadows across the polished floor. It was just after 2 p.m., and a lunch rush had settled into a quiet hum of conversation. Malik Johnson wiped his brow with the back of his hand as he carefully arranged the fresh salad display. At 22 years old, he stood tall and confident, his dark eyes sharp and observant behind his glasses. Unlike most students who took cafeteria jobs just to earn some extra cash, Malik approached his work with the precision of a scientist. That's because he was one. A brilliant food science student who had won his place at the prestigious university through a hard-fought scholarship. Every penny he earned here went toward the textbooks and lab supplies his scholarship didn't cover. "Hey Malik, you're still coming to study group tonight, right?" called his friend Dion from behind the sandwich counter. "Dr. Patterson's exam is going to be brutal." Malik nodded, carefully placing the last bowl of specially prepared quinoa salad on the display. "Wouldn't miss it. I've got some notes on food enzymes that might help everyone." Just as he stepped back to admire his work, the cafeteria's atmosphere shifted. A murmur swept through the room, starting near the entrance and rippling outward like a stone dropped in still water. Malik glanced up, curious about the disturbance. A group of men and women in expensive suits had entered, led by a tall man with silver-streaked hair and the confident stride of someone used to being in charge. Even if Malik hadn't recognized his face from countless magazine covers and news reports, the respectful distance everyone gave him would have signaled his importance. "Is that?" whispered Dion, abandoning his sandwich station to stand beside Malik. "Warren Hayes," Malik confirmed quietly. "The tech billionaire." The university had been buzzing for weeks about Hayes visiting campus to announce a major donation to the computer science department. What nobody expected was for him to casually stroll into the research cafeteria for lunch. Hayes and his entourage made their way to a table that staff quickly cleared for them. The cafeteria manager hurried over, personally taking their orders with a nervous smile. Malik returned to his work, though he couldn't help stealing glances at the billionaire. He'd read everything he could find about Hayes, not because of his wealth, but because of something they unexpectedly shared. 20 minutes later, Malik was refreshing the salad bar when he noticed something that made his heart stop. Hayes had been served the special of the day, a mushroom risotto with truffle oil. The billionaire lifted his fork, the creamy rice just inches from his mouth. In that moment, time seemed to slow down for Malik. He remembered the article he'd read just last month. A rare interview where Hayes had mentioned his unusual allergies, including one to a specific type of mushroom compound. The same compound that Malik knew was abundant in the black truffles used in today's special. Without thinking about the consequences, Malik dropped the tongs he was holding. They clattered loudly against the metal serving tray. "Sir, don't eat that," he shouted, his voice cutting through the cafeteria buzz like a knife. Every head turned. The security personnel standing discreetly near Hayes stiffened, hands moving instinctively toward their jackets. The billionaire himself froze, fork suspended in midair, his steel-gray eyes finding Malik across the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Malik felt his mouth go dry as he realized what he'd done. He'd just shouted at one of the richest men in the world. The cafeteria manager looked at him with horror. His job, his scholarship, his future, everything suddenly seemed to hang by a thread. But Malik also knew what could happen if Hayes ate that risotto. The allergic reaction might not kill him, but it would certainly send him to the hospital. And no one else in the room appeared to have any idea. Taking a deep breath, Malik stepped away from the salad bar. His legs felt like jelly, but he forced himself to walk toward Hayes' table. The security team tensed further, but Hayes raised a hand slightly, signaling them to wait. "I'm sorry for shouting," Malik said, his voice steadier than he felt. "But that dish contains black truffles with a compound you're allergic to. You mentioned it in your Bloomberg interview last spring." Hayes' eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. He lowered his fork slowly, his gaze never leaving Malik's face. "And you are?" he asked, his voice neither angry nor friendly, just intensely curious. "Malik Johnson, sir. Food science major." He swallowed hard. "And I think we need to get you a different lunch." The entire cafeteria had gone quiet. You could have heard a pin drop as everyone watched the scene unfold. Malik stood there, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. The security team surrounding Warren Hayes had shifted their positions slightly, ready to step in if needed. Hayes studied Malik for what felt like an eternity, his piercing eyes never leaving the young man's face. Then, to everyone's surprise, he carefully placed his fork back on his plate and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, young man," Hayes said. His voice was calm but commanding. Malik hesitated, glancing nervously at the cafeteria manager, who stood nearby with a look of absolute horror on his face. The manager gave a small, jerky nod, and Malik slowly pulled out the chair and sat down. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain yourself," Hayes continued, folding his hands on the table. Malik took a deep breath. This was his chance, and he knew he had to make it count. "Sir, in your Visionary magazine profile last year, you mentioned having a rare allergy to alpha-hydrazine compounds found in certain fungal species," Malik explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "I noticed you were served the mushroom risotto with black truffles. The specific truffle variety they use in this cafeteria contains high levels of that exact compound." One of Hayes's assistants immediately began typing on her tablet, presumably fact-checking Malik's claim. The security team remained tense, but Hayes himself seemed to relax slightly, a flicker of interest passing across his face. "And you recognize this? How?" Hayes asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm in my final year of food science," Malik replied. "I've been working on a research project about uncommon food allergens and their detection. As part of my research, I studied cases of public figures with rare food sensitivities. Yours was particularly interesting because the compound is so uncommon that most places don't even test for it." The assistant looked up from her tablet and gave Hayes a small nod, confirming what Malik had said. A murmur went through the cafeteria as people began whispering to each other. The tension in the room started to dissolve. "Most people wouldn't have recognized that," Hayes said thoughtfully. "Even my own staff sometimes forgets. What gave it away?" Malik pointed to the risotto. "The specific truffle variety has a slightly more yellowish tint in the spores. Regular diners wouldn't notice, but I've been studying these differences under microscopes for months." Hayes leaned back in his chair, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He turned to the cafeteria manager, who was still hovering nervously nearby. "Could we get a different lunch?" he asked calmly. "And perhaps something for Mr. Johnson," Malik supplied. "Malik Johnson." "Something for Mr. Johnson as well," Hayes finished. The manager practically tripped over himself, rushing to comply. Around them, the cafeteria slowly returned to its normal buzz as people realized there wasn't going to be any drama. "So, Malik Johnson," Hayes said, fixing those intense eyes on him again. "Tell me more about this research project of yours." Malik felt like he was in a dream as he began explaining his work. His project focused on developing more accessible testing methods for rare food allergens. Current testing equipment was expensive and usually only available in high-end restaurants or medical facilities. "My mother has severe allergies," Malik explained, finding his confidence as he spoke about a subject so personal to him. "Growing up, we couldn't afford the fancy testing kits. She had several bad reactions when we ate out, even when we told the restaurants about her allergies." Hayes listened intently, occasionally asking sharp, insightful questions that showed he was genuinely following along. His initial skepticism had transformed into undisguised interest. "It's not just about the science," Malik continued, passion evident in his voice. "It's about accessibility. People shouldn't need to be wealthy to stay safe when they eat." As Malik spoke, he noticed one of Hayes' assistants was quietly recording their conversation. Another was taking notes. But it was Hayes' expression that held Malik's attention. The billionaire was looking at him with something that seemed like respect. "You know," Hayes said when Malik paused to catch his breath, "I came to this university today to donate money to the computer science department. I never expected to find something interesting in the cafeteria." He smiled fully then, and Malik felt a surge of hope. "Perhaps," Hayes continued, "we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. I'd like to hear more about your testing methods." And just like that, Malik realized his impulsive shout across the cafeteria might have changed the course of his life forever. 30 minutes later, Malik found himself sitting in an empty classroom that had been quickly secured by Hayes' team. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting dust particles dancing in the air. The room felt strangely quiet after the buzz of the cafeteria. Hayes sat across from him, his suit jacket now draped over a nearby chair. Two of his assistants remained in the room, standing discreetly by the door. The rest of his entourage had been dismissed to continue with the planned university tour. "Sir," Hayes said, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk, "tell me exactly how your testing method works." Malik reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn notebook filled with handwritten notes and diagrams. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. "The current testing methods require expensive lab equipment," Malik explained, flipping to a diagram he had drawn. "My idea uses a chemical reaction that changes color when it detects specific allergen proteins. It's similar to how pregnancy tests work, simple to use but scientifically sound." Hayes studied the diagram with interest, and the accuracy rate. "In my limited trials, about 97% for the most common allergens," Malik replied. "But I haven't been able to test it widely because of funding limitations." Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "Why hasn't anyone done this before?" "The concept seems straightforward enough." Malik smiled slightly. "That's what my professor said too. But sometimes the simplest solutions get overlooked because everyone's looking for something complicated." He paused. "Also, there's not a lot of money in making medical technology affordable. The big companies focus on high-end equipment for hospitals and fancy restaurants." One of Hayes' assistants cleared her throat. "Sir, we should head to the donation ceremony in 15 minutes. Hayes waved her off without looking away from Malik's notebook. "What about production costs? Have you worked that out?" "Each testing strip would cost less than $2 to produce at scale," Malik said, flipping to another page filled with calculations. "That's compared to the current options that run $15 to $20 per test, minimum." Hayes whistled low. "And what are the limitations? There must be some drawbacks." Malik appreciated that Hayes wasn't just nodding along. He was asking the tough questions any investor would ask. "Right now, it can only test for one allergen at a time," Malik admitted. "And it takes about 3 minutes to show results, which is slower than the premium testers. But for people who can't afford those options, waiting 3 minutes is nothing." Hayes was quiet for a moment, studying Malik with an intensity that made him want to squirm. But Malik held his gaze. His old neighborhood friends had taught him never to look away when someone was sizing you up. "Can I ask you something personal, Malik?" Hayes finally said. Malik nodded cautiously. "Why food science? With your obvious intelligence, you could have chosen many fields." The question caught Malik off guard. He'd been ready to defend his research, not his life choices. "My mom," he said simply. "She raised me alone after my dad left. She has severe allergies to peanuts and shellfish. When I was 8, she ate at a restaurant that promised their food was safe. It wasn't." Malik swallowed hard at the memory. "I watched her stop breathing. A customer who happened to be a nurse saved her life with an EpiPen." Malik looked down at his hands. "We couldn't afford to eat out much anyway, but after that, Mom was scared to eat anything she didn't cook herself. On my 12th birthday, I promised her I'd find a way to make sure that never happened again." The room fell silent. Even the assistants by the door had stopped typing on their tablets. "That's quite a promise for a 12-year-old to make," Hayes said softly. Malik shrugged. "Kids make big promises. I just never outgrew this one." 30 minutes later, Malik found himself sitting in an empty classroom that had been quickly secured by Hayes' team. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting dust particles dancing in the air. The room felt strangely quiet after the buzz of the cafeteria. Hayes sat across from him, his suit jacket now draped over a nearby chair. Two of his assistants remained in the room, standing discreetly by the door. The rest of his entourage had been dismissed to continue with the planned university tour. "Sir," Hayes said, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk, "tell me exactly how your testing method works." Malik reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn notebook filled with handwritten notes and diagrams. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. "The current testing methods require expensive lab equipment," Malik explained, flipping to a diagram he had drawn. "My idea uses a chemical reaction that changes color when it detects specific allergen proteins. It's similar to how pregnancy tests work, simple to use but scientifically sound." Hayes studied the diagram with interest and the accuracy rate. In my limited trials, about 97% for the most common allergens, Malik replied. But I haven't been able to test it widely because of funding limitations. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Why hasn't anyone done this before? The concept seems straightforward enough. Malik smiled slightly. That's what my professor said too. But sometimes the simplest solutions get overlooked because everyone's looking for something complicated. He paused. Also, there's not a lot of money in making medical technology affordable. The big companies focus on high-end equipment for hospitals and fancy restaurants. One of Hayes' assistants cleared her throat. Sir, we should head to the donation ceremony in 15 minutes. Hayes waved her off without looking away from Malik's notebook. What about production costs? Have you worked that out? Each testing strip would cost less than $2 to produce at scale, Malik said, flipping to another page filled with calculations. That's compared to the current options that run $15 to $20 per test, minimum. Hayes whistled low. And what are the limitations? There must be some drawbacks. Malik appreciated that Hayes wasn't just nodding along. He was asking the tough questions any investor would ask. Right now, it can only test for one allergen at a time, Malik admitted. And it takes about 3 minutes to show results, which is slower than the premium testers. But for people who can't afford those options, waiting 3 minutes is nothing. Hayes was quiet for a moment, studying Malik with an intensity that made him want to squirm. But Malik held his gaze. His old neighborhood friends had taught him never to look away when someone was sizing you up. Can I ask you something personal, Malik? Hayes finally said. Malik nodded cautiously. Why food science? With your obvious intelligence, you could have chosen many fields. The question caught Malik off guard. He'd been ready to defend his research, not his life choices. My mom, he said simply. She raised me alone after my dad left. She has severe allergies to peanuts and shellfish. When I was 8, she ate at a restaurant that promised their food was safe. It wasn't. Malik swallowed hard at the memory. I watched her stop breathing. A customer who happened to be a nurse saved her life with an EpiPen. Malik looked down at his hands. We couldn't afford to eat out much anyway, but after that, Mom was scared to eat anything she didn't cook herself. On my 12th birthday, I promised her I'd find a way to make sure that never happened again. The room fell silent. Even the assistants by the door had stopped typing on their tablets. That's quite a promise for a 12-year-old to make, Hayes said softly. Malik shrugged. Kids make big promises. I just never outgrew this one. Something shifted in Hayes' expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight nod as if confirming something to himself. Where I come from, Hayes said, people judge your worth by what you build, not where you started. He closed Malik's notebook and handed it back to him. I built my first company with nothing but a borrowed laptop and an idea everyone said was impossible. He stood up, straightening his tie. I'm supposed to give a big check to your university today for their computer science building. Very boring, very expected. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. But I'm thinking I might announce something else as well. Malik's heart began to race. Come to the ceremony, Hayes said. Sit in the front row. And bring your research notes. The billionaire turned to leave, then paused. Oh, Malik. Thank you for stopping me from eating that risotto. The last time I had an allergic reaction, the board tried to use it as an excuse to suggest I step down as CEO. He smiled wryly. Saving a billionaire from hives and a hospital visit might be the least interesting thing that happens today. As Hayes and his team left the room, Malik sat frozen in his chair, unable to believe what had just happened. His phone buzzed with a text from his friend Dian. Dude, what just happened? The whole cafeteria is talking about you. Malik stared at the message, trying to process the last hour of his life. Then he gathered his notes, took a deep breath, and headed for the university auditorium. Whatever Hayes was planning, Malik wasn't going to miss it for the world. The university auditorium was packed to capacity. Students, faculty, and local press filled every seat, with people standing along the walls. The air hummed with excitement and the scent of too many people in one room. Malik squeezed through the crowd, mumbling apologies as he made his way toward the front. Malik. Over here. Dian waved frantically from the third row. He had somehow saved Malik a seat, but Malik shook his head and pointed to the front row. Hayes told me to sit there, he mouthed silently. Dean's eyes widened in disbelief. He gave Malik a thumbs up and quickly snapped a photo with his phone, probably already composing the social media post in his head. The front row was reserved for university officials and important guests. As Malik approached, a woman with a clipboard looked him up and down, taking in his cafeteria uniform still visible under his hastily thrown-on jacket. "This section is reserved," she said firmly. "I know, but Mr. Hayes asked me to sit here," Malik replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly not believing him. "And you are?" "That's Malik Johnson," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see Hayes' assistant, the one who had been taking notes during their meeting. Mr. Hayes specifically requested his presence in the front row. The clipboard woman's demeanor changed instantly. "Of course, right this way, Mr. Johnson." As Malik took his seat between the dean of students and the head of the university's development office, he felt wildly out of place. The dean glanced at him curiously. "You're the student from the cafeteria," he said. "Word travels fast around here. What exactly did you say to Hayes?" Before Malik could answer, the university president stepped up to the podium, and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to welcome one of the most innovative minds in technology today," the president announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "A visionary entrepreneur whose contributions to both technology and philanthropy have changed countless lives." As the introduction continued, Malik sat nervously clutching his notebook. What if Hayes had just been being polite? What if sitting in the front row meant nothing? Finally, Hayes took the stage to enthusiastic applause. He looked completely at ease standing before the crowd, dressed in the same suit he'd worn in the cafeteria, though someone had brought him a fresh shirt. "Thank you for that generous introduction," Hayes began. "I'm honored to be here today at State University, an institution known for its commitment to innovation and excellence." He delivered a short, polished speech about the importance of education and technology, the kind of talk he had probably given dozens of times before. Then he paused, looking out over the audience until his eyes found Malik in the front row. "I came here today planning to donate $5 million to your computer science department," Hayes said. The audience burst into applause, but he held up his hand. "And I still intend to do that." He stepped away from the podium, walking to the edge of the stage. "But something unexpected happened today. I had an encounter that reminded me why I started my company in the first place." He gestured toward Malik. "This young man stopped me from eating something I'm allergic to. But that's not the impressive part. What's impressive is why he knew about my allergy." Malik felt every eye in the room turn to him. His face grew hot. "Malik Johnson is working on something remarkable," Hayes continued. "A low-cost testing device that could democratize food safety for millions of people with food allergies. When I asked him why he's developing this technology, he told me about watching his mother nearly die from an allergic reaction when he was a child." The room was completely silent now. Malik saw several people turn to look at him with new interest. 20 years ago, I was rejected by 17 venture capital firms," Hayes said. "They all told me my ideas were impractical, too ambitious, too different from how things had always been done." He smiled wryly. "Sound familiar to anyone trying to do something new?" A knowing chuckle rippled through the crowd. The truth is, innovation rarely comes from the expected places or the established players. It comes from people who have lived with problems and are determined to solve them. Hayes turned directly to Malik. "Would you stand up, Mr. Johnson?" On shaking legs, Malik rose to his feet. The spotlight that had been following Hayes now split, with a second beam illuminating Malik. "In addition to my donation to the Computer Science Department, I'm announcing today the creation of the Hayes Innovation Fellowship. It will provide funding, mentorship, and resources to students developing practical solutions to real-world problems." Hayes smiled. "And I'm pleased to announce that the first recipient will be Malik Johnson to fund the development and testing of his allergen detection device." The auditorium erupted in applause. Dean was on his feet, cheering loudly. The dean beside Malik shook his hand vigorously. The head of development looked like she might faint from excitement. Malik stood frozen in disbelief. Just hours ago, he had been arranging salads in the cafeteria, worried about making rent this month. Now, a billionaire was announcing a fellowship with his name as the first recipient. Sometimes, Hayes continued once the applause died down, all it takes is one person brave enough to shout across a cafeteria, "Don't eat that." The crowd laughed, and Hayes gestured for Malik to join him on stage. As Malik made his way up the steps, he caught sight of his cafeteria manager standing at the back of the room, looking absolutely dumbfounded. Life could change in an instant, Malik realized. Sometimes all it took was the courage to speak up when it mattered most. 1 week later, Malik stood outside the gleaming glass building of Hayes Technologies headquarters. The morning sun reflected off the windows, nearly blinding him as he checked his reflection one last time in his phone camera. He had spent his last bit of savings on a new shirt and tie for this meeting. The security guard at the front desk had already called upstairs to confirm his appointment. "Mr. Johnson." A young woman with a tablet approached him in the lobby. "I'm Tanya, Mr. Hayes' project coordinator. We're ready for you now." Malik followed her into an elevator with walls so polished he could see his nervous expression from every angle. His stomach lurched as they shot upward, stopping at the 37th floor. The doors opened to reveal a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. What made Malik stop in his tracks wasn't the view, but the people. The long table was filled with men and women in expensive suits, all turning to look at him as he entered. At the head of the table sat Warren Hayes, who stood and smiled when he saw Malik. "Right on time," Hayes said, gesturing to an empty chair beside him. "Everyone, this is Malik Johnson, the student I told you about." Malik walked forward, suddenly aware of his budget dress shoes and the small coffee stain on his sleeve that he thought he hidden well. He took the offered seat, noticing the stack of folders in front of each person. On the cover was a photo of his allergen detection prototype alongside his name. "These are the heads of our various departments," Hayes explained, pointing around the table. "Research and development, legal, marketing, manufacturing, and finance. They've all reviewed your proposal." Malik swallowed hard. When Hayes had asked for his research notes after the ceremony, Malik had hastily typed up a proper proposal, working through the night to make it as professional as possible. But he never expected it to be distributed to the entire executive team. "Before we begin," Hayes continued, "I should mention that Malik doesn't know why I've called this meeting." He turned to Malik. "After our encounter at the university, I had my team run a complete background check on you. I hope you don't mind." Malik's mouth went dry. "What kind of background check?" "The kind that goes back to elementary school," Hayes replied with a small smile. "We found something interesting. You've submitted this allergen detection idea to 3 different funding competitions in the past 2 years." Malik felt his cheeks burn. "Yes, sir." "And you were rejected all 3 times." Hayes continued, his expression unreadable. "Yes, sir," Malik repeated, wondering if this whole thing had been a setup for public humiliation. Hayes leaned forward. "Do you know why you were rejected?" Malik had read the rejection letters so many times he could recite them from memory. The feedback said my idea lacked market potential, that people who need allergen detection either already have access to it or couldn't afford any solution, no matter how inexpensive. A woman at the far end of the table made a disgusted noise. "Shameful reasoning," she muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Hayes nodded. "I agree, which is why we're not here to reject your proposal, Malik. We're here to challenge it." "Challenge it?" Malik asked, confused. Hayes gestured to the man sitting opposite Malik. "Dr. Chen is our head of R&D. He has some questions about your chemical detection method." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense questioning Malik had ever experienced. Dr. Chen grilled him on the specifics of his detection chemicals, the manufacturing process, and potential cross-reactivity issues. The legal team asked about patent possibilities and regulatory hurdles. Marketing wanted to know his thoughts on target demographics and distribution channels. Through it all, Malik held his ground. When he didn't know an answer, he said so plainly. When he disagreed with their suggestions, he explained why. His voice grew stronger with each response, his initial nervousness fading as he defended the project that had consumed him for years. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Hayes held up his hand to stop the questioning. "Enough," he said. "I think we've put Malik through enough for one day." The room fell silent. Malik realized he was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He forced himself to relax. Hayes looked around the table. Opinions? The finance director spoke first. The profit margins would be minimal. This isn't a moneymaker for us. But the potential market is huge, countered the marketing director. Over 200 million people worldwide have food allergies. If even 10% purchase this device, the technical approach is sound, Dr. Chen added. With our resources, we could address the multi-allergen detection limitation within 6 months. They continued discussing him as if he wasn't there. Some arguments were in favor of his device, others against. Malik felt like he was watching a tennis match, his future being batted back and forth across the table. Finally, Hayes turned to him. Do you have anything to add, Malik? Malik took a deep breath. Just one thing. You're all talking about profits and markets and technical specs. Those matter, I get it. But when my mom had her allergic reaction in that restaurant, I was 8 years old watching her stop breathing. No child should have to see that. The room went quiet. This isn't just about making money, Malik continued, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. It's about people being able to eat without fear. Rich or poor, everyone deserves that basic dignity. Hayes studied him for a long moment, then looked around the table. I didn't build this company just to make money. I built it to solve problems. He stood up. We're moving forward with this project. I want prototypes in 3 months and market-ready devices in 1 year. Several executives started to protest, but Hayes silenced them with a look. And one more thing, he added. Malik will be leading the project. Malik's jaw dropped. Sir, I'm still a student. I don't have a degree yet, or any management experience. Hayes smiled. Neither did I when I started this company. Sometimes the people closest to the problem are the ones best equipped to solve it. He extended his hand. Welcome to Hayes Technologies, Malik. Your first real challenge starts now. As Malik shook the billionaire's hand, he realized that his life had just changed forever, all because he had shouted across a cafeteria 1 week ago. 6 months later, Malik stood in the middle of his own lab at Hayes Technologies, surrounded by whiteboards covered in chemical formulas and prototype designs. The space was a far cry from the cramped university labs where he'd started his research. Here he had cutting-edge equipment, a team of 5 researchers working under his direction, and a budget that still made him dizzy when he thought about it too long. The latest test results just came in, said Tanya, walking in with a tablet. She had become his right-hand person over the past months, helping him navigate the corporate world that was still so foreign to him. 98.7% accuracy across all 8 major allergens. Malik took the tablet, scrolling through the data with a growing smile. That's even better than yesterday's batch. The new binding agent is working. He walked over to a clear case containing rows of what looked like simple test strips, similar to home pregnancy tests, but with a different color scheme. Each one represented months of work, failures, and breakthroughs. Is everything ready for the presentation tomorrow? He asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of his voice. All set, Tanya assured him. The boardroom is booked for 10 a.m. Dr. Chen will be there with the full R&D team, and Mr. Hayes is flying back from Tokyo specifically for this. Malik nodded, but his stomach was already tying itself in knots. Tomorrow marked their first major milestone, proving that their device could reliably detect multiple allergens at once, something Malik had initially thought would take years rather than months to achieve. You should go home and rest, Tanya suggested. You've been here since 5 a.m. Just one more test, Malik insisted, turning back to his workstation. You said that 3 hours ago, she pointed out with a smile. Go home. See your mom. You've been talking about showing her the prototypes for weeks. At the mention of his mother, Malik paused. She was right. He hadn't visited home in almost 2 weeks, caught up in the final push to perfect the device. Fine, he conceded. But I'll be back early tomorrow to double-check everything. 30 minutes later, Malik pulled up in front of the small apartment building where he had grown up. It wasn't in the best neighborhood, but his mother had always kept their home spotless and welcoming. He grabbed a bag containing one of the prototype devices and headed inside. The smell of his mother's cooking hit him as soon as she opened the door. She pulled him into a tight hug. Look at you, she said, stepping back to examine him. You're too skinny. Are they not feeding you at that fancy company? Malik laughed. I eat, Mom. I just forget sometimes when I'm working. Well, you're going to eat now, she declared, pulling him toward the kitchen where a pot of her famous stew simmered on the stove. Your timing is perfect. Dinner's almost ready. As his mother busied herself with the food, Malik took a seat at their small kitchen table, the same one where he'd done his homework as a kid. So much had changed in his life, but this place remained exactly the same, a fact he found comforting. I brought something to show you, he said, pulling the prototype from his bag. His mother wiped her hands on her apron and sat down across from him. Is this it? The thing you've been working on? Malik nodded, carefully removing the device from its protective case. It was small, about the size of a credit card, but thicker, with a simple display screen and a slot for test strips. It works like this, he explained, demonstrating with one of the sample strips. You touch the strip to the food, then insert it here. In about 30 seconds, it tells you if any of the 8 major allergens are present, even in tiny amounts. His mother took the device, turning it over in her hands with wonder. And this little thing can detect peanuts? And shellfish? And dairy, eggs, tree nuts, wheat, soy, and fish, Malik added. Eventually we'll add more, but these cover the most common allergies. And anyone will be able to afford it, she asked, her eyes shining with pride. That's the plan, Malik confirmed. We're aiming for under $30 for the device and less than $1 per test strip. We might even work with insurance companies to make it free for families with severe allergies. His mother reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Your father should have stuck around to see what an amazing man you've become. Malik shrugged. His loss. He had long ago made peace with his father's absence. Besides, I did this because of you, not him. They were interrupted by a buzz from Malik's phone. He checked it reluctantly, not wanting to break this moment with his mother. It's from Warren, he said, surprised. Hayes rarely texted him directly. He wants to meet tonight. Says he has news that can't wait until tomorrow. Then you better go, his mother said firmly. Don't keep that man waiting. But dinner. I'll pack it up for you, she insisted, already grabbing a container. Your big boss doesn't text you at night for no reason. An hour later, Malik found himself in Hayes's private office on the top floor of the company building. The space was surprisingly modest compared to what Malik had expected from a billionaire, functional rather than flashy. Hayes was standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. He turned when Malik entered. Sorry to pull you away from your evening, Hayes said. But I got some information today that couldn't wait. He gestured for Malik to sit. Our competitors found out about your device. Malik felt a chill run through him. How? Corporate espionage is an unfortunate reality in this business, Hayes said grimly. Someone on the manufacturing team was approached with a bribe for information. Fortunately, they came to me instead. What does this mean for tomorrow's presentation? Malik asked. Hayes sat across from him. It means we need to move faster. I've just come from an emergency meeting with our patent attorneys. We're filing all the patents tonight. He slid a thick folder across the desk. These need your signature as the primary inventor. Malik's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents, page after page of legal language, all centered around his invention. There's something else, Hayes continued. I received an offer this afternoon. Pharmatech wants to buy the rights to your device. They're offering $50 million. Malik nearly choked. $50 million? Hayes nodded. It's a solid offer. But before you get too excited, you should know what they plan to do with it. His expression darkened. Their business model would price these at $200 per device and $15 per test strip. They'd market exclusively to high-end restaurants and wealthy individuals. The excitement that had fled briefly in Malik's chest died instantly. That defeats the whole purpose. People who need this most couldn't afford it. Exactly, Hayes agreed, which is why I already declined their offer. Malik looked up in surprise. You did? This is your invention, but I know why you created it. Hayes leaned forward. The question is, what do you want to do now? We can still sell if that's what you prefer. Your cut would set you up for life. Malik thought about the prototype sitting on his mother's kitchen table, about the pride in her eyes when he explained how affordable it would be. He thought about the 8-year-old boy watching his mother struggle to breathe in a restaurant, feeling helpless and afraid. "I don't want to sell," he said firmly. "I want to finish what we started, make it available to everyone." Hayes smiled, seeming pleased but not surprised by Malik's answer. "Then we better get these patents filed and prepare for battle. The road just got harder, but I think you've proven you don't back down from a challenge." As Malik began signing the patent documents, he realized how far he had come from that day in the cafeteria. He wasn't just a student with an idea anymore. He was an inventor fighting to bring his creation to the people who needed it most. And he was just getting started. 18 months after that fateful day in the university cafeteria, Malik stood backstage at the National Health Innovation Conference, adjusting his tie for the 5th time. Through the curtain, he could hear the buzz of thousands of attendees waiting for the keynote presentation. "You look fine," said Hayes, walking up beside him. "Stop fidgeting." "Easy for you to say," Malik replied. "You do this kind of thing all the time." Hayes chuckled. "Believe it or not, I still get nervous too." He checked his watch. 5 minutes till showtime. "Are you ready?" Malik took a deep breath and nodded. The past year had been the most challenging and rewarding of his life. After they'd filed the patents, Pharmatech had tried to block them with legal challenges. For months, their project had been tied up in court battles and red tape. Malik had spent countless hours with lawyers, testifying about his invention's development process. Through it all, Hayes had stood by him, spending millions on legal fees and refusing all settlement offers that would have limited the device's accessibility. 3 months ago, they'd finally won the case, clearing the way for today's launch. "Just remember," Hayes said, "speak from the heart. That's what got us here in the first place." The conference organizer approached them. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Johnson, we're ready for you." As they walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded Malik. When his vision cleared, he saw the massive audience stretching out before him. In the front row sat his mother, looking beautiful in a new dress he'd bought her last week. Beside her was Dion, who had graduated and now worked in the marketing department at Hayes Technologies. His old cafeteria manager was there too, looking slightly uncomfortable in a suit but beaming with pride nonetheless. Hayes approached the microphone first. "Thank you all for coming today. 18 months ago, I visited a university cafeteria and nearly ate something I was allergic to." He paused, smiling at the memory. "A student working there shouted across the room for me to stop. That moment changed both our lives." Hayes gestured for Malik to join him at the podium. "I'd like to introduce you to that student, Malik Johnson, now the head of our newest division and the inventor of the product we're launching today." As Malik stepped forward, the audience applauded. He waited for the noise to die down before speaking. "Growing up, I watched my mother struggle with severe food allergies," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "When I was 8 years old, she had a reaction that nearly killed her. That day, I promised I would find a way to make eating safer for her and millions of others like her." Malik held up a small device, and cameras zoomed in to project it on the giant screens around the hall. "This is AllerScan," he continued. "It's small enough to fit in your pocket, but powerful enough to detect trace amounts of the 12 most common allergens in food within seconds." He demonstrated how it worked, touching a test strip to a plate of food and inserting it into the device. Almost immediately, the screen displayed "No allergens detected." The best part: AllerScan will retail for $25, with test strips costing less than $1 each. And thanks to partnerships we've established with major health insurance providers and non-profit organizations, many families will receive them for free. The audience erupted in applause. Malik saw his mother wipe away tears in the front row. "But we're not stopping there," he continued when the room quieted again. "Starting today, Hayes Technologies is launching the Food Safety Initiative, a non-profit foundation that will distribute AllerScan devices to schools, community centers, and low-income neighborhoods across the country." He turned to Hayes, who stepped forward again. "And I'm personally donating $100 million to ensure this technology reaches those who need it most," Hayes announced. "Because innovations in health should benefit everyone, not just those who can afford them." The room exploded with applause and camera flashes. As Malik looked out at the cheering crowd, he thought about all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. from a shouted warning in a cafeteria to standing on stage announcing a product that would help millions. After the presentation, as they made their way through crowds of reporters and well-wishers, Hayes pulled Malik aside. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said, guiding Malik toward a quiet corner where a small girl in a wheelchair waited with her parents. "This is Lily," Hayes explained. "She has 7 different food allergies. Her parents reached out to me when they heard about Alaskan." The girl's mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Before today, we could never eat at restaurants. We couldn't let her go to birthday parties or school events. She's been hospitalized 3 times from accidental exposure." She looked at Malik with pure gratitude. "You've given our daughter a chance at a normal childhood." As Lily's father handed her an Alaskan device, one of the first production models, her face lit up with joy. She looked up at Malik with wide eyes. "Now I can go to my friend's party?" she asked hopefully. Malik knelt down to her level. "Yes, you can, and you'll be safe." Later that evening, as the conference wound down, Malik found himself standing outside on the balcony, taking a moment alone to process everything. Hayes joined him, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "To changing the world, one cafeteria shout at a time," Hayes said, offering Malik a glass. Malik laughed and accepted the toast. "You know, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't said anything that day. I'd have had an allergic reaction, recovered, and gone on with my life, never knowing what I was missing," Hayes replied. "And you would have eventually found another way to make your dream happen." He took a sip of his champagne. "The truly remarkable people always do." Malik looked out at the city lights, thinking about the journey ahead. Alaskan was just the beginning. He already had ideas for the next version and the one after that. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing in me." Hayes shook his head. "I didn't do you any favors, Malik. I made an investment, the best one of my career." He raised his glass again, to the future. As they clinked glasses, Malik thought about all the children like Lily whose lives would be changed by his invention, all because he had the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Sometimes, the smallest actions led to the biggest changes, and Malik Johnson was just getting started.